Good afternoon. We'll continue our CAB meeting this afternoon with a specific discussion on trends and themes. And following this, we'll close the arc of our focus on consumer experience by shifting to a discussion on financial well-being. I'd like to invite our Vice Chair, Maeve Elise Brown, to introduce this next session.
Thank you, Bill. At every CAB meeting, we invite a few CAB members to share information on their specific area of expertise. And to date, we've had CAB members who have presented on a wide variety of issues, such as consumer protection and service members, older Americans, arbitration, pre-acquired account marketing, amongst other topics. Today, we have three of our wonderful CAB members, Gary Acosta, Don Baylor, and Jonathan Zinman, who will present on issues impacting limited English proficiency consumers, tax time savings initiatives, and overdraft. I'm going to introduce, and I will give a fuller introduction of each right now in one shot, and then call you by name to go one at a time. You're each going to have we have about 30 minutes per person. We have about an hour and a half for this segment, so we're guesstimating hopefully about 20 minutes of presentation, more or less, 15, 20 minutes, and then some space for conversation. We'll see how it works out. All right, so to fill folks in, Gary Acosta currently serves as the CEO and co-founder of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. NAHREP is the nation's largest minority real estate trade association. In 2012, Mr. Acosta received the Investing in Communities Award from the Mortgage Bankers Association and was recognized as one of the 100 most influential Hispanics in America by Hispanic Business Magazine. He currently sits on the Diversity Committee of the MBA and the Board of Governors for the National Housing Conference. That's Gary. Don Baylor at Urban Institute. Don Baylor currently serves as Senior Associate at the Urban Institute, where he co-leads their state and local policy advisory group. He previously worked at the Austin-based Center for Public Policy Priorities as a lobbyist, policy analyst, and Director of Opportunity, Texas. Mr. Baylor's prior positions include Legislative Director for the New York Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, and Senior Consultant for KPMG Public Sector Consulting Practice in Sacramento, California. And last but not least, Jonathan Zinman is a professor of economics at Dartmouth College, a position he has held since 2005. He's also co-founder and lead researcher of the U.S. Household Finance Initiative of Innovations for Poverty Action, a nonprofit research and development organization. Previously, Mr. Zinman was an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and a loan fund manager and strategy analyst at the Massachusetts Community Development Finance Corporation. All right, so thank you, wonderful people. We're going to go ahead and lead off with Gary.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the issues that NAHREP is working on today. I am, historically, I've been in the real estate industry, a mortgage banker. I'm a practitioner really by trade, but I have been the co-founder and I'm currently the CEO of NAHREP today. NAHREP is, we describe ourselves as being a purpose-driven organization that is really propelled by a passionate combination of an entrepreneurial spirit, cultural heritage, and advocacy of its members. Our mission is to advance sustainable Hispanic home ownership. And we do that by educating and empowering the real estate agents that serve Hispanic buyers and sellers, really helping them better understand the nuances and be properly prepared to be good service providers to that segment. We advocate for public policy that supports our mission, and we facilitate relationships amongst industry stakeholders, real estate practitioners, and other industry professionals. We are a trade group, but our mission statement really drives us to be a very consumer-focused trade association. Some of the activities that we pursue is networking activities. That includes providing mentorship opportunities for our members, advocacy, leadership opportunities for our members generally at the local or chapter level, and professional and business development. As you can see from that photo, we're also known as being a very good-looking trade association. That's exactly right. We believe in home ownership. I think you'll, if you don't know already, the Hispanic community in general is very passionate about home ownership. Latinos are in this country in large part for economic opportunity and homeownership always sort of rises to the top of prioritization and what Hispanics really view as success in this country. We're a nonprofit trade association, a 501c6. 2/3 of our members are real estate agents and brokers, and the balance of our membership comes from different ancillary service providers such as mortgage banking, settlement services, and even other nonprofit associations. We're 15 years old. We were founded in 1999. We'll be 16 this summer. And our sphere of influence is about 50,000 practitioners who touch the association in some capacity, either by attending one of our events locally or nationally, participating in social media, or perhaps even communicating with us through the internet and whatnot. We have 20,000 individual members of the association and 35 local chapters throughout the country. And our tagline is, NARP is a place where Hispanic culture and business opportunity intersect. And you'll see from our activities as an organization really how we really deploy that. NARP, I'll just kind of touch on these a little bit. Every year we rank the top 250 Latino real estate agents in the country. Our national convention is called the NARP National Convention and Latin Music Festival. So if you come to our convention, be prepared to dance, because that's just part of the culture there. We have a housing policy event every year. This year it's scheduled for the end of March 30th and 31st here in Washington, D.C. We call that event our Housing Policy and Hispanic Lending Conference because we focus a lot on the issues in the lending industry. We have our local chapters. ESN is a web-based YouTube channel. It's actually a talk show that we use to communicate issues to our members. We have a leadership academy, and this year we launched consulting services to help various stakeholders and industry participants better understand and prepare for serving the very fast-growing Latino segment. This year we're in the current, we do things a little bit differently. We are currently deploying a national tour of what we call a theatrical keynote called 53 Million and One, which is being deployed at local theaters, kind of theaters where you see plays. And it really sort of chronicles one individual's journey as an undocumented immigrant in this country to today being a very successful real estate entrepreneur and all the experiences that go along with that. And then we release our State of Hispanic Homeownership report every year, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about here. So our State of Hispanic Homeownership report, we use that as a document to measure our success as an organization. Remember, our mission is to advance sustainable Hispanic homeownership, so we want to see how we're sort of doing every year. And we identify trends and barriers and challenges. We really use the document as a template to help us develop our own agenda for the coming year. Our next report will be coming out at the end of March. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the issues that will be in that report, and I'll also talk about some of the previous reports' information. We chronicle Hispanic market activity. We do an analysis of demographic and economic trends. We gauge consumer sentiment. We identify from our members primarily some of the barriers that Hispanics are confronting in terms of their aspirations to achieve homeownership. And we use it also to formulate our advocacy priorities. A lot of the data we get from this report is aggregated from other sources. We get information from the Census Bureau and from other organizations like the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies and the Urban Institute. Most of the original data that's in the report comes from our members directly. So we survey our members pretty regularly and try to get information from them. They're in the trenches. They're there dealing and interfacing with consumers on a regular basis, so their perspective is unique and I think very relevant. So some of the trends that we saw in 2013, which is the report that was completed and deployed last March. And so one of the things that rose to the top in terms of challenges was just the challenge in terms of inventory. So in 2013, real estate agents reported to us that their biggest challenge in terms of getting what they believed to be qualified consumers into homes was just inventory related. And some of that we think is short-term in nature. It was competition from cash investors, and that was very robust in 2012 and 2013. It was really the lack of new construction, especially in the areas of affordable housing stock. And then thirdly was just the number of households that had negative equity, underwater households. So people who maybe wanted to sell, but just couldn't sell unless they were willing to do a short sale. All of that kind of led to a perfect storm that really made inventory challenging, especially in the first-time homebuyer market. Access to credit was one that was certainly communicated to us. I think it was a little bit camouflaged by the lack of inventory, because most agents communicated to us that they actually had more qualified buyers than there was homes available. But we see that changing, and you'll see from the 2014 report that has changed a little bit. This is a snapshot of the report. This shows you sort of historical trends. You can see from 2000 to 2013 what Hispanic homeownership has done. And so the first column next to the year is the rate of homeownership. You might note that the Hispanic homeownership rate is roughly the same today as what it was in 2000, even though it made a lot of sort of moves in between. You'll see that the number of Hispanic households, so in 2000, you had a 46% homeownership rate, which is, if you don't know, is the ratio of total Hispanic households and what percentage of them actually owner households. So 46% of Hispanic households were owner occupied. And that meant that 4.2 million, roughly, Hispanics own their own home. Today it's 46%, but you'll see that 6.7 million Hispanic families own their own home. So even though the number has been increasing, the ratio has been about the same, and that's obviously because of the increase in population and the increase in household formations within that very fast-growing demographic. And the last column really shows the net change, positive or negative. For the most part, and pre-crash, those numbers were pretty robust. You can see from 2008 to 2010, they were flat or negative. Coming out of the crash, we had kind of an initial bump, but that bump has actually started to plateau and even go down a little bit. We're still positive, and we will be positive for 2014 as well, but the net growth has been relatively modest. If you look forward, and our report also probably spends as much time, if not more, really sort of giving a forward-looking analysis. Obviously, population trends within the Hispanic community is very positive. For some reason, we like having children, and I think we're going to continue to do that for quite a while. So in 2014, a population in the Hispanic community was 53 million. That's projected to go up to 120 million by 2050. In California today, Hispanics are the largest racial demographic. They are larger than the white population. That happened a couple years ago. And 25% of children, people under the age of 18, are Hispanic nationwide. You'll also note that some of the fastest growing populations of the Hispanic community are in non-traditional areas, the Midwest, areas like Des Moines, Iowa, Charlotte, North Carolina, and even the South have some of the fastest growing Hispanic populations in the country. I think Hispanics have demonstrated to be pretty mobile and willing to go where the work is, essentially, and also follow affordable housing. Just some of the economic trends. So we know that there's a growing demographic, a growing population, but there's also positive trends in terms of economics. This is obviously not spread out equally, but in general, sort of macro terms, Hispanic income is increasing. The buying power is significant. Job growth, Hispanics represent a very large percentage of new entrants into the job market. And consumer sentiment for Hispanics remains very strong. The Hispanic community, I think, arguably, maybe not even arguably, was harder hit than any other demographic in the housing crisis. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We reside in large numbers in some of the hardest hit markets, but Hispanics were also victimized by predatory lending to a substantial degree. And a lot of that is due to language barriers and inexperience with the process. But even with that, in the very recent history, this is an analysis that Fannie Mae does every year, their National Housing Survey. Hispanics outpace the general population in terms of their view and enthusiasm for home ownership even post-crash. So you've got a growing population that has increasing means and a very strong desire to participate in homeownership. A preview of our 2015 report, which will be out in a little bit over a month. Some of this may seem redundant, but I'll go over it anyways. Hispanics since 2000 have accounted for 50% of the net homeownership growth. That means that overall in the country, there are approximately 5 million new homeowners, more homeowners than there were in 2000, and 2.5 million of those were Hispanic during that period of time. The Urban Institute recently issued a report that said that Hispanics will likely, and this was sort of their mid-tier projection, represent 55% of new homeowners by 2020. So roughly 55% of first-time home buyers by 2020 will come from the Hispanic population. In terms of homeownership or household growth, in 2014, there were 320,000 more Hispanic households than there were the previous year. This represents about 40% of household formation growth in the country. But if you look into those households, you also notice that Hispanic households are twice as likely to have two parents and at least one child. So again, very much aligned for home ownership. And then economically speaking, even though it may not always seem that way, Hispanics are making good progress economically. They were the only major demographic to lower its poverty rate and boost its annual household income during that year, which grew by 3.5%. Hispanic household income in 2013, median household income was approximately $41,000. And about 30% of the Hispanic population, in terms of households, earn between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. So a lot of positive information. I mean, it may sound a little Pollyannic, actually, but those of us that are working that community on a regular basis, you know, you feel it. You feel the enthusiasm, you feel the energy. I interface with entrepreneurs every day. That's my network. You know, they expect nothing but good things in the near future. We surveyed the top 250 list, which is the Hispanic top 250 real estate agents in the country. 65% of them expect 2015 to be a better year, not just for them, because real estate agents will always tell you next year will be better, but for their competitors. The Hispanic community in general, 65% of them, you know, expect it to be a stronger year in general. And so that's just, you know, the traffic that they're feeling, the number of people that they're communicating with. I love this data point. The Hispanic purchasing power is roughly $1.4 trillion, which is roughly equivalent to the entire country of Canada right now, just to give you a sense. Nothing against Canadians. I love Canadians, but it just gives you a sense of, you know, how large the Hispanic population is. They expect that to reach $2 trillion by 2020. Again, sentiment for home ownership is very powerful. I like to tell the story, the anecdote that, you know, Hispanics are in this country for economic opportunity. We want to buy homes. We want to participate in those things. We're not here because we don't like the food or the music or the people with respect to the country we come from. This is an economic choice in almost every occasion. So it's not surprising that Hispanics remain very enthusiastic and optimistic from an economic standpoint. And then just a few other data points. 93% of Hispanics prefer owning a home. They say that it's what they want. We hear all these, you know, new, you know, surveys and information and data points saying how millennials, you know, just they don't get home ownership. They don't want to be a part of it. They like to remain mobile. Well, 25% of millennials are Hispanics today. And, you know, there's still a lot of enthusiasm for home ownership. An important point is, historically speaking, roughly 40% of Hispanics who have purchased the home used a mortgage where they put less than 5% down. So even though the income gap is shrinking, the wealth gap has not shrunk much at all. And so access to low down payment mortgages is essential in terms of serving this community effectively. The survey that I mentioned a little earlier, where we surveyed our top Latino agents in the country, and this is just literally yesterday I was getting some of the results of the survey. through my cell phone. And so this year, tight credit ranked as number one, as what they view as the biggest challenge in 2015. So I think as inventory is starting to balance out a little bit, so you got a lot more people this year who have positive equity and may want to sell. You have less foreclosures and short sales out there in the marketplace. And so that sort of supply and demand thing is starting to balance out. The access to credit issue is starting to rise to a higher challenge. But when I talk to real estate agents directly and ask them, so tell me directly, do you think that people who are qualified to get mortgages are not getting them? And the response is actually different than what you'd expect. They say for the most part, they think that they can qualify, with the exception of self-employed borrowers. They really feel that that is a gap there that is not really closing very quickly. But what they say is that they can qualify for a mortgage, but they can't qualify for enough of a mortgage. And so therefore, we think things like the reduced MIP premiums is gonna have a very positive impact in 2015. So I think some of the extra costs associated with low down payment mortgages, both at FHA and in the conventional space, has really had an impact on the Hispanic community in particular for that wealth sort of gap, as I expressed. So anything that we can do, I think, to sort of manage that in a better way, I think will have a very significant impact. Inventory shortages started to fall further down the list in terms of barriers. An interesting factoid, and I think there'll be people in this room who will be surprised if not just outright disagree with this. In 2000, when we conducted this survey, our agents told us that the number one barrier to Hispanic home ownership was a lack of information about the home buying process. In this particular survey, where we gave them 8 options, it ranked last. So of course, I'm asking real estate agents whose job is to inform the public of what the opportunities are and what the process is like. But there's definitely feeling out there that that knowledge gap has improved over time. But the perspective from Hispanic consumers is, this came from Fannie Mae, is still largely, it is very difficult to get a mortgage today. 72%, which is higher than any other segment of the population, said it is very, very hard to get a mortgage today. So the last slide that I want to talk about is just, NARP has actually been active in the whole immigration dialogue out there, a pretty strong advocate for immigration reform. But taking an economic sort of path to really make that case, really taking information from organizations like Pew and kind of blending it with other information that we have out there, really tried to make the case that immigration reform would actually result in a very positive way in terms of increasing demand in the housing market in particular. We think that over 10 years, up to 3 million new buyers will enter the market if that was accomplished. The MBA actually did a study last year that we thought ourselves was actually interesting and surprising. They were able to ascertain that Hispanic immigrants that have been in this country for at least 15 years actually had a higher home ownership rate than Hispanics born in this country. In fact, if you look at Hispanic immigrants that came in the 1980s, they actually have a 61% home ownership rate today. So, that's interesting. Maybe not that surprising. Again, the reason people immigrate here is for economic reasons, largely. But again, kind of making the case that, if we can somehow get beyond the politics and do what's really right for the country and not just what's right for the individuals, the impact to our economy would be very positive to get this issue resolved. So, last thing I want to say is that, we represent, obviously practitioners, small business professionals, and it's no surprise that they want to see the process and the path to home ownership be easier. That being said, I think most of them, especially those affiliated with our organization, would say what took place prior to the crash, the market environment, the regulatory environment in particular, was just rife for abuse. And Hispanics, as I said before, probably took it harder than any other demographic. So there's no question that this agency in particular has had a positive impact in really making it tougher for the bad actors to enter the marketplace, and we're grateful for that. And now as I think the market starts to stabilize and the pendulum starts to kind of move back the other way, we do definitely need to keep an eye on access to credit and make sure that people who have the means and the desire to participate in home ownership continue to have that opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gary. Let's open it up for questions. What questions do we have for our colleague? On data points?
While people are formulating questions,
Yes.
let me just add.
Sorry.
Said there was a very significant, very influential study issued last year by the Harvard Joint Center for Housing that looked at the data all the way through the financial crisis, you know, one of the toughest times in the housing sector in generations, decades at least, and found that nonetheless, home ownership remains the best avenue toward wealth accumulation in our society. And that's largely because of the forced saving component of having to pay on a mortgage every month and some of that going to pay down principal. No matter what else people do with their money, if they're not doing that, they tend not to save at the same rates. And even though there is now, we now know, risk involved in the appreciation up or the decline of housing prices, which people at one time had kind of excised from their mind, even with the ups and downs of housing prices, it is still the case that people who manage sustained home ownership over time build wealth more than any other means in our society. That's very important to know, because I think a lot of, especially younger people, reluctant to enter the housing market because they've seen risk here. They've seen some people lose their homes and homes that are underwater, and that can happen. Happens not that frequently in our history, but it can happen. But nonetheless, if you do buy a home and pay on it and stay in that home for any significant amount of time, you're going to tend to increase your wealth accumulation beyond other things that you might tend to do in your life. That was a very notable, I thought, result of that study. Reinforces points that you just made.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, actually, let me take it in the order I saw. Jean first.
Yeah, thank you. I want to follow on the director's comments, but as it relates to the Hispanic community's experience with the housing crisis, as you pointed out, you know, there's had a big negative impact on the wealth of those people who had gotten into the system, you know, maybe through predatory lending and so forth. But the attitudes that are expressed are amazingly resilient. So are you finding that people are, are you finding that people who have experienced that legacy, are they finding a way forward out of it? Or is there evidence of that, that is still weighing on their attitudes about future homeownership opportunities? So is there a separation between those people who've experienced the negative effects and those people who basically were not involved in the housing crisis?
That's a really great question. So, I mean, we talk about, you know, that in general, the Hispanic market remains enthusiastic about home ownership. But what about the individual families and people that were affected by the crisis? So there's no question that, you know, that has sort of modified their perspective a little bit. But there is a phenomena that we in the industry call boomerang buyers. And these are buyers that have experienced, you know, one of those challenges, either foreclosure, short sale, or something of the like, and are back in the market today. So I think that the industry in general, I think, well, let me just say that Fannie Mae actually put a study out during pre-crisis that showed that a large percentage of Hispanics in particular who were getting subprime loans could have qualified for a conventional mortgage. So you've got people out there who still have the means. Maybe they have good jobs, they understand the process, and they just got into a bad deal. And a lot of those folks want back into the marketplace, no doubt.
Thanks, Gary. I had a quick question. You had an interesting statistic that it was harder for self-employed Hispanics to qualify. Do you have any data, compare that to the general population?
Yeah, our report will actually have some data like that. I don't have it available to me on my fingertips, but I will say that the self-employed phenomena with the Hispanic community isn't as simple as it may seem. What is probably more common is you have one family member that is self-employed who contributes to the household, even if you have, another family member that has a W-2 wage job, and that additional income is necessary for qualification, and it's just not being captured through the mechanisms. I mean, one of my critiques, I think, in the industry is that even though we've, I think, improved a lot of the ways that we assess risk, the way we evaluate income is almost the exact same way we did 50 years ago. And people earn money very differently today. And this isn't just a Hispanic phenomena. I mean, I love a lot of people, young people, they drive Uber, they make websites, and, and that's a very common scenario today. And so I think we're going to have to kind of catch up to what the population is doing from a income analysis standpoint.
Patricia, Julie, Patty, and then we'll make Ann last in the interest of time. Patricia?
Thank you for the information, Gary. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Hispanic population that is monolingual Spanish speaking?
Oh, that's a great question. So, our analysis is this. If you look at NARP and you participate in a NARP event, you'll see that it is entirely in English. I mean, people will be talking to each other in Spanish in the hallways, and we'll definitely have a salsa band there, and they'll be speaking Spanish for sure. But I think the folks that are in the industry, generally communicate in English. That said, a percentage of the homebuyer population, certainly, even if they have English language capabilities, they're Spanish language dominant, and they prefer to communicate in Spanish for something as important as purchasing a home. That's roughly 25% of the Hispanic homebuyer population prefers to negotiate their transaction in Spanish.
Very interesting. Julie?
So thank you, Gary, for the report. I just wanted to comment that a key issue facing Minnesota and many other states, homeownership and economic health, is the growing gap in homeownership, or maybe confounding and persistent gap in homeownership rates between white households and households of color. And a known factor contributing to that is the lack of trusted advisors, real estate and lending professionals of color. And the leadership and the work of organizations like NARUP is just critical to ensuring cultural agility and eventually systemic changes in the industry before we're ever going to really get at this confounding problem. And then my question is, have you talked with your membership, and how is your membership talking about the issue of ITINs?
So a couple questions there. One, just as a side note, NARP also has a foundation, and we're going to kind of release some of the initiatives that we're going to pursue, and one of them, central to the foundation moving forward, will be to recruit and at least communicate the opportunity in the mortgage banking and real estate space to a larger Hispanic population. So, that's, we see that as a big challenging gap out there, but a great opportunity at the same time. ITIN loans, so that's a good, we haven't heard that in the 10, 12 years. I was actually once on Hannity and Combs because NARP did a study on ITIN loans. They invited me on that show, and I was naive enough to actually accept that. So I still have it on a DVD somewhere. But anyways.
They say no publicity is bad publicity.
That's right. So ITIN loans, we actually do webinars for a lot of our stakeholders, many of whom are in the mortgage industry, and they ask about that a lot. Do you have to have ITIN loans if you're going to be relevant in the Hispanic market? And my answer to that is actually, I'm sorry. ITIN loans are, it stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. So it's an ITIN. It is in lieu of a social security number. And a lot of folks who have those don't have legal status in this country. I mean, maybe they've just overstayed their visa, or maybe, there's another reason why they're here, but they're using that number. Most of them, or a lot of them, have been in this country for a long time. And it started off actually in the Midwest. Community banks in the Midwest actually created ITIN loans, which was they would grant mortgages to people who had ITINs and didn't have social security numbers. They went away when the crisis, happened, as did any other, a lot of niche products. But the, sort of anecdotal sort of data that's out there is that they actually performed very well. They performed well, probably outperformed other niche products that were similar. So today we're seeing people start to re-enter that marketplace. It is a risky sort of phenomena that's out there because there is the potential for abuse when you're dealing with people who aren't really familiar with the process. And ITIN loans are not cheap. They generally require 20, sometimes 30% down payment, and the interest rates are 3 to 5 percentage points, full percentage points above the market rate. But there's a demand for them, and there are some lenders out there that are providing those mortgages, but they do it really just to, I think, express their commitment to the Hispanic market. It's a great door opener when you're talking to real estate agents who might have that one borrower who needs it. But I don't expect it to be a large percentage of the lending gross market or the lending numbers for Hispanics moving forward.
Patty and Ann, briefly, if you can, so we can move forward.
One of the slides you mentioned that home ownership or understanding of the home ownership was on the bottom.
Yes.
Right. Where do you see pre-purchase counseling then fitting in here?
So we actually, as an association for several years, so we put out sort of a list of advocacy priorities, and we've always been very strong advocates for pre-purchase counseling. We even advocated for it to be a requirement for FHA loans. We liked, the direction HUD was going earlier in the year before the budget didn't come through. I think our members understand that it's important. We think it's essential, and so we're big supporters of counseling.
Thanks for your great and informative presentation. One of the things that's really struck me is some recent research about wealth gaps between African American and Latino families and white families in the United States. They're huge, 13,000 as compared to 140,000. And as Director Corder was saying, if homeownership is a major step toward building wealth, and yet a lot of Latinos from your presentation end up in the subprime market, and that tends to lead to some more often negative outcomes in the process. And so I'm wondering, do you have any initiatives as you talk about boomerang buyers or people going and trying to get in the market again to ensure that this second round or this, in the post-crisis, that people are getting access to the best kind of credit possible? And I think that realtors can play a really important role in that because that's the primary advisor to the individual, and many times people go to the broker their realtor recommends. So I wonder if you have any initiatives or efforts to address that.
That's a great point. I mean, I was obviously referring to pre-crash as a large percentage of Hispanics taking out subprime loans. That's not necessarily the case today because there really isn't much subprime lending out there. We kind of take a balanced sort of take at that, because, on one hand, I do think that the absence of subprime lending is unfortunate because there are people out there that have circumstances that prevent them from being able to participate in home ownership. And some of those people are very capable. And so a reasonable increase in terms of yield to offset that additional risk we think is not a bad thing. But that being said, we very much, advocate for every consumer getting the best loan that they're able to qualify for, and certainly one that is aligned with their particular circumstance. And so I think that coming out of the crisis, there's a different perspective around the responsibilities that real estate agents have, especially in terms of being that trusted advisor for their consumers. I think the people that participate in NARUP are certainly it's preaching to the choir when you're talking to them. It's everybody outside of that I think we need to do a better job in terms of educating and advocating for. But that wealth gap is interesting. I'll just say one thing also. So NARUP announced a wealth project last year that I didn't mention, that we're actually releasing a blueprint in March, really that lays out a plan to triple Hispanic household wealth over the next 10 years. When you see those wealth percentages, and it is substantial, 10 times the difference generally, they're generally referring to median wealth. And so if you have a 46% homeownership rate, then you can probably assume that that median family is not a homeowner. So if you can get that homeownership rate above 50%, that median number will likely increase probably substantially. Because if you just look at Hispanic homeowners versus non-homeowners, that number is probably 4 to 5 to 1 as well. So that is embedded in our plan for this wealth project.
Great questions, great presentation. I'm sorry to be hustling along here a little bit. I want to shift gears to Don Baylor. I will add my 2 cents. I'd love to talk about housing sustainability. Wealth building is nice, but how do you keep it? Let's do both. So Don, take it away.
They say in Texas, this ain't me. So I don't know if, so I think that we need to queue up the other presentation if we want to stay in order. So I'm not ready to talk turkey. Is that it? No, that's not mine. Oh, it's going to be the third. I think it's going to be the third one. Okay, thank you. Great. So real quickly, just a couple of notes about. So a couple of notes about this presentation before I start scrolling. So this obviously is really kind of based upon the work that I did in Texas. Really from 2011 to 2014, obviously currently now with the Urban Institute, so definitely want to give props to my former colleague, Laura Rosen, who probably still feels like she's working for me at this point. She really kind of helped me out a lot with this presentation. I thought, as just trying to comply with Meva's request to have something timely and interesting for the trends and themes that, given that we're really kind of in the middle of tax season right now, and given the CFPB's congressional mandate about promoting tax time savings, I thought it would be appropriate to really kind of talk about the work that we did in really kind of building a statewide coordinated campaign to really boost tax time savings. And largely this effort and this initiative was really, I think, inspired by a lot of work, and I actually want to, not only call out the folks that are actually implementing this currently, because it's currently in its 5th year of operation, but also based upon a work done by Barbara Robles, actually 2004, 2005, 2006, when she was surveying volunteer income tax assistance sites along the Mexican border, and actually asking questions of tax filers about what they wanted to do with their refund. And this was really largely before there was an option to actually split your refund through Form 88, which I believe happened in 2007. And so there's a lot of other folks, obviously, that inspire this work, but definitely wanted to call that out because we ended up really kind of using a lot of our findings and survey results to really kind of inspire this particular campaign. So real quickly, so talked a little bit about, the fact that you can not only now split your refund into 3 different accounts, but also Treasury added the capacity to be able to purchase savings bonds directly through the tax form if you have a refund. And I'll talk a little bit later about the convenience of that. But just real quickly, just a little bit about kind of the moment of savings at tax time. So you look at, and this is mostly looking at Texas data, The average EITC or earned income tax refund is about $2,500. A good chunk of the workforce actually receives the EIT in Texas, about 1 in 5. The average income, annual income, a little bit below $21,000, and the average tax refund a little bit over $2,000. And volunteer income tax assistance sites, there are approximately about 250 such sites around the state, and they serve approximately 125,000 Texans every year. I think one of the things that's been interesting looking at those numbers over the years is that those numbers served at brick and mortar, temporary, community-run sites have essentially doubled since 2007. So even though we think about, given that there's lots of other ways to file your taxes now, there are still a lot of folks actually going to these sites, really kind of using the trusted advisor model to get their taxes prepared. And we also thought that one of the benefits that VITA sites can have is to be able to layer on additional financial services, whether or not they be referral for other financial services or benefits access or even savings opportunities. So I'll actually skip this slide a little bit. So here you actually see so the flat line you kind of see from 2007 to 2010. 2007 was when Form 888 became available, or split refunds. But in 2011 was when actually a couple of things happened. So our initiative began in 2011, really on a very, very small scale. We had the benefit that not a lot of nonprofit organizations had. We actually had some money to play with, right? And so we decided that we were going to take advantage of this opportunity with some additional funds to begin to partner with a couple of tax assistance sites to promote refunds or to promote savings at the sites. And so we began kind of on a very relatively small scale and began to experiment with different types of incentives. And so the beginning kind of experimental phase was looking at, okay, what if we give people a $5 fast food gift card? What if we give folks a $25 fast food gift card? Or what if we give people a $10 grocery store gift card? And so we began to experiment with a lot of different types of incentives and really began to sell upon $25 and at a grocery store gift card. That seemed to be kind of the magic number, seemed to be somewhat of the magic place because everybody needs to eat. And so you're kind of, no pun intended, kind of feeding into this notion of, giving people something that they can spend now for an investment or savings for tomorrow. And so it's really kind of feeding that kind of today and tomorrow need that many folks tend to have. And so a couple of other things were happening, I think, at this particular time. Save NYC, which a lot of people may be familiar with, that really kind of started out of the New York City's Office of Financial Empowerment, which was a little bit of a different model. This was a depository account-based model in which there was a delayed incentive for people to deposit a portion of their refund, and if they kept their refund in the account for a year, they would get incented $250. So it was kind of a 50% match, but certainly one of the things that was obvious was that you actually had to have someone that was there to open the account. So you either had to have a financial institution partner on site all or most of the time, or you needed to be able to empower many of the VITA site volunteers, which was really kind of an unworkable model at that point. So many of the early demonstrations really required there to be some type of on-site bank or credit union personnel to actually be on site to actually open an account. And so as you can probably imagine, this is pretty time and labor intensive. And so there were other sites around the country, San Antonio being one, and the other being Houston, that came on board in 2011 that really kind of took the account-based approach because they had either really strong relationships with credit unions or financial institutions that were willing to kind of put in a lot of time and energy to actually open, 300 or 400 accounts really over a 2 to 3 month period. So it's in many ways it's a really great demonstration. It really does show that people will save for a long period of time for 12 months because about 70% or so of the folks were able to actually keep their money in that account for a year and actually receive the incentive on the back end about a year after they filed their taxes. But when we started our program in 2011, we really wanted to be able to, as much as possible, scale up this particular initiative with all across the state. And so not really having to require financial institution participation. Also, with regard to access, certainly one of the things that was a barrier was this I-10 issue or having a social security number to be able to open an account. And savings bonds were something that really did not have those particular barriers in place. And so it made it a much more universal product that many more folks could take advantage of. And so after the first year, 2012, we really began to build this out and partnered actually with the United Ways of Texas because many of their local United Ways operate or fund Vita-Sites to participate or to file taxes or assist folks with filing taxes all throughout the state. And so you kind of are able to have really kind of some geographic reach. We were in East Texas, South Texas, Southeast Texas, West Texas, et cetera. There was a little bit of a variation. The United Ways wanted folks to actually purchase at least $100 in savings bonds, but for the most part, you were able to get an incentive by purchasing only $50 in savings bonds. So, as you may know, CFPB's been doing a lot of work around this. Having materials, other types of collateral to get folks to save a portion of their refund. Doorways to Dreams has also done stuff around this. They actually had a photo contest last year, and we're actually proud to say that one of our savers was actually the one that won the $25,000 in Austin and won the grand prize. And so it really kind of is a way to kind of make tax filing a little bit more exciting. Certainly another state that has done some coordinated work around this has been Alabama. They have done work really kind of based a little bit more on kind of the save to win or kind of lottery concept. So not really offering folks incentives, but putting them into a drawing that folks can actually get prizes kind of on the back end. So one of the things that was really interesting for us was, I talked a little bit about this $25 sweet spot. And so one of the things that we found, if you kind of look at that second row there, so $25 incentive would, on average, get folks to save. So a lot of folks were going above and beyond the $50 or $100. So we had several folks per year, several dozen folks per year that were buying $250 or even $500 in savings bonds. Some were even buying $1,000 in savings bonds, et cetera. So one of the things that we were able to kind of capture was that, on average, we were getting about a 6-to-1 or so return, 5-to-1 and so return. So for every dollar in incentives that we were offering, we were generating about $5 in savings. So it just kind of goes to show that you don't need to necessarily match folks 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 to get folks to save. A little bit of something that they can actually use today was really, really valuable for folks. And one of the things I think that was also reflective is I think that when we first started this initiative, 4 out of 5, the vast majority of folks they were actually saving a portion of their refund for the first time. And I think as the initiative and as the project kind of wore on, you started to see word of mouth actually not only take place from year to year, but actually within the tax season itself. And so you were having people that would actually talk to their friends, and more or less in many of these sites, they would actually run out of grocery store gift cards because the word of mouth had actually kind of reached a little bit of a fever pitch. So we're now, they're now in kind of the 5th year of this. We actually did work in a depository account-based tax time saving initiative in 2013 and 2014 in partnership with credit unions that were actually operating their own VITA sites. And so that, you were able to kind of really kind of eliminate that problem of actually needing to have kind of this extra layer because you actually had essentially the same personnel that were assisting people to file taxes as we're actually opening accounts on a regular basis. And we actually did something a little bit different. And so instead of, basically incentivizing people for keeping their money in their account for the entire year and doing nothing, we were actually incentivizing people for saving throughout the year, which was really interesting. And a good chunk of those folks, well over 80% of those folks actually received an incentive because they were doing some type of routine or ongoing savings throughout the year, not just simply kind of keeping their money there. So this kind of gets us kind of wrapping up here because I think that we actually found some really interesting things that I think have implications, not just for public policy, but also just for marketing. So even with these incentives and this varied, we had about a take-up rate of about 3%. So as we know in this work, sometimes it's very difficult to give away free money, and this kind of shows this. But I think even with a take-up rate of only 3%, that is a little bit above average for kind of similar programs of its type. One really interesting finding was that the average saver had a much higher refund than the average VITA filer, almost 50% higher, so close to $4,000. So kind of the implication that they were making a mental calculation that, okay, I can save $100 if I'm getting close to $4,000 in my refund. Another really, and this I think really kind of aligned with a lot of research that Barbara Robles had done almost a decade ago. And one of the great things about savings bonds is that you can not only buy them for yourselves, you can actually have a co-owner. And so many of the folks that we interviewed actually put their kids on the savings bond. They really saw this as kind of a down payment for their kids, and particularly for their education. And so this was presumably an easy way, and I think that this really kind of shows the desire and ambition upon many low-income working families to save for their kids' education. I think that one of the things that we see in survey after survey is the gap between the desire and the ambition and the ability and the opportunity to be able to do so. And so we kind of, through the research that we did and, in interviewing folks as they were purchasing a savings bond, getting a sense of what they were saving for. So education, retirement, and emergencies were really kind of the top 3. And as I mentioned, a good chunk of folks were actually seeing these as investments for their kids and their kids' education. And a little bit about the marketing. I talked a little bit about the fact that a basic needs type of incentive appears to produce the best results. It's something that they can actually literally walk out the door and go use right away. And so that really kind of seemed to kind of speak to folks. Another thing that we found was that it was important to kind of pre-market this opportunity. So VITA sites or others that were in the community talking about this prior to or in between tax season was really important. Probably not a surprise that a lot, many folks are waiting in line anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour to have their taxes filed, and they're on their smartphones pretty much the entire time. And so there's obviously opportunities for marketing, while they're actually in some type of mobile device. And I think that we also begin to test different messages. And one of the messages that seemed to work the best was, because I think that we talked about, trying to give away free money is very difficult, but this idea, because people were like, well, what's the catch, right? And this language about, do you want to earn a gift card, seemed to be fairly effective in getting people to get over the barrier of the skepticism barrier to some extent. So anyway, that is what we found, and so we're expecting that we'll see fairly consistent or even an upward tick in tax savings this particular tax season. So,
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I've got lots of questions. I'm sure you guys do too, but I'm actually going to limit us to 2 questions so that we can leave time and not keep bleeding excessively into the next little bit. John?
Comment and a question. And I made this comment before. It seems to me like if we're interested in facilitating wealth accumulation in a VITA filing population, we should be focusing a lot more on providing people with easy on-ramps to paying down expensive debt. I mean, the math just isn't even close. If I'm borrowing on credit cards or I have a subprime auto loan or a private student loan, or I'm regularly using payday loans, I mean, it's just a no-brainer that I should be taking my free cash and paying down debt more quickly as opposed to buying a savings bond. So that's the comment, and to the extent there's a question in there, I'd be interested in hearing about what you done or anyone has been seeing in terms of activity at VITA sites that's focused on debt pay down instead of or in addition to savings promotion.
So, so I think there's probably about 3 or 4 answers to that question, non-question. So I think, one is that the folks that were trained to actually offer the bond promotions very much had that in mind. And also some of the research that had been done, actually asked people, and so debt retirement and paying down debt was actually one of the things that people wanted to do and often do with their refund. And so I don't think that the folks saw it necessarily as an either or. I think that for a lot of folks, especially in Texas anyway, the big thing that they're going to be paying down is their utility bill, right? That many of them still have overdue or past due utility bills from the previous summer. And so that is probably the kind of higher order of magnitude thing that people were going to attack first if they were having a refund. And so I think that there's that. So it definitely was not an either or. And I also think that there was discussion with folks about financial coaching. So we talked about referral to other services. Those financial coaching referrals did happen in conversations, whether or not people actually purchased a savings bond or they did not. And so I think the final comment was that the amounts that were saved were relatively small, kind of compared to what their debt might be. But certainly the folks that were helping people prepare their taxes and helping them save did talk to people about the needs that they have, not just promoting savings. But I do think that there is a gap in terms of how do you directly send that money to a creditor. And I think that is probably one of the the challenges or barriers is that there's not a easy A to B or 1, 2, 3 to be able to send that money directly. And so I think that's one of the just logistical challenges that we have.
Last question, Steve?
So, Don, great presentation, and it's really it's great to have the data, year after year. So, nice job on collecting all that. I think one of the things as you were going through this that struck me is I think the success of a program like this would come from repeat usage, right? Because it looks like each year you had to resell everybody, and as the folks who are coming into each one of those centers, probably had about a 30% or more, just a little bit more year-over-year repeat usage rate. Any thoughts on like how is that something that you guys are pushing on or the team will push on? I'm assuming it might be a little bit difficult because they may not come back to the same place every year for service.
So a couple answers to that. So one is we actually had a pretty vigorous debate within our team about whether or not we wanted folks to actually come back the year after to actually save, because whether or not we wanted to open it up to new people, right? And so obviously with limited resources, do you want folks that, have not had the opportunity to save, or folks that were just able to save this past year? So we ended up kind of settling on just kind of opening it up and allowing people to do so. But we did hear in both anecdotally and statistically that people the previous year had saved. So about a little bit over a third of the folks were what we call repeat savers, which we thought was relatively good, because that actually shows that it was a positive experience for them, and that they were beginning to try and build wealth year over year, not just kind of on a one-time, not just on a one-time deal.
I regret having to cut that conversation short. That was a really great presentation. Really, all of this feeds into what we'll hear from the CFPB staff about personal financial well-being. Let's move forward to Jonathan. If you could squeeze your presentation part into more like 12, 15 minutes, that would be lovely. Thank you.